Mrs. Eleanor Harrison thought she was about to stage the perfect humiliation, a gotcha math problem so brutal it could snap the confidence of a valedictorian in half. What she did not know was that she was about to get mathematically body-slammed by the one student she'd already written off. Meet Jamal Williams, 16 years old. Tall, sharp-jawed, eyes that never flinched, and a smile that could flip arrogance into silence. While most kids his age stayed up scrolling TikTok until their brains melted, Jamal was up at 2 a.m. solving equations that made NASA engineers cry. He wasn't just carrying textbooks in one hand, he carried an entire future on his shoulders. His classmates saw a quiet transfer kid in worn sneakers. What they didn't see? That same quiet kid was secretly demolishing MIT's open courseware at night like it was light bedtime reading. Westfield Academy wasn't just a school, it was an empire of privilege. Here, AP Calculus wasn't a class. It was a birthright, usually inherited alongside Dad's law firm and Mom's country club membership. Mrs. Harrison ruled this kingdom for 23 years with an iron chalk. Her walls glowed with Ivy League success stories. She believed she'd seen it all. But Jamal wasn't like the others. He rode 2 buses, worked grocery shifts, and still found time to master equations her prized students wouldn't touch until grad school. And the cruel joke? His silence was strategy. He knew in Westfield speaking up without a pedigree was like bringing a knife to a bazooka fight. Mrs. Harrison didn't see strategy. She saw weakness. Scholarship kids mean well, but they're usually in over their heads. She'd whispered smugly over coffee. "Oh, Eleanor, if only you knew." The irony was about to knock louder than bias itself. While Mrs. Harrison sat at home stewing about whether Jamal could keep up, Jamal was already 3 chapters ahead, casually juggling problems she wouldn't dare assign. She fretted about his preparation, but the truth? He was knee-deep in math she couldn't even teach with a PhD and a projector. At home, his mother knew the secret. More than once, she'd stumble into the kitchen at dawn and find her son asleep on a pile of scribbled equations that looked like alien hieroglyphics. Pencil still in his hand, head tilted, jawline sharp even in exhaustion. She'd cover him with a blanket, kiss his forehead, and whisper prayers to a God she trusted more than textbooks. "That boy's got something special," she'd say on her weekly call with her sister. "I don't know what half those numbers mean, but I know they mean something big." She was right. But Westfield Academy wasn't built to recognize brilliance that came in bus passes and thrift store shoes. It wasn't designed for kids whose mothers worked double shifts instead of hosting fundraisers. Jamal wasn't just facing equations, he was facing a system addicted to pedigree. Mrs. Harrison had a signature move. She called it diagnostic teaching. Translation: surprise ambushes designed less to measure knowledge and more to confirm her own prejudices. Jamal, of course, had become her favorite lab rat. "Let's see if you've been keeping up," she'd say, calling him to the board like a judge sentencing a defendant. She expected hesitation, stammering, failure. Instead, Jamal would stroll up, solve the problem cleanly, and return to his seat without theatrics, like a surgeon putting down the scalpel after a flawless operation. This quiet mastery only made her itchier. She smelled a fraud, not a prodigy. So today, Eleanor Harrison came prepared. She closed her grade book with the snap of someone about to make history, and the classroom went pin-drop silent. "Class," she declared, her voice carrying the drama of a Broadway monologue, "we've spent 2 weeks on integration by parts. Let's see who's really been paying attention." She pulled out a manila folder inside a problem lifted from a graduate-level math textbook. This wasn't teaching. It was a firing squad. Her eyes gleamed. "Jamal," she said, her tone sugar-sweet but knife-sharp. "Since you've been so quiet lately, why don't you show us what you've learned?" Every head swiveled toward him. Madison Chen, queen of color-coded notes, twisted in her seat, her highlighter hovering mid-air. The moment had arrived. Jamal stood, his calm smile barely hiding the storm he was about to unleash. The room thought they were about to watch a boy drown. They had no idea they were about to witness a boy swim laps in water nobody else dared enter. Tyler Bradford, whose dad basically bought the library, leaned over to whisper some smug joke. Sarah Williams, no relation, but plenty of side-eye, simply stared. Mrs. Harrison, meanwhile, was smiling like a poker player who thought she had the winning hand. She slid the problem sheet onto the ledge. 15 minutes, she announced, with the air of a general declaring war. Explain each step so we can see your thinking. Translation: dance for us, scholarship boy. Jamal walked to the board under the weight of every expectation in the room. Not the hopeful kind, the bloodthirsty kind. Friday, just before lunch, the perfect timing for public failure to marinate all weekend and spread through Westfield's gossip network like Wi-Fi. But when Jamal glanced at the page, his pulse didn't spike from fear. It spiked with recognition. This was MIT material. Problem set 7, question 4. He'd already killed it 2 weeks ago at 1 a.m. while eating leftover noodles. Mrs. Harrison had accidentally handed him home turf. He could have faked struggle. He could have thrown the fight. But quiet anger rose. Anger at being a prop in someone else's prejudice theater. He picked up the marker. This is a multivariable integration problem, he said, voice steady, resonant. We'll need substitution and partial derivatives. The room leaned in. Step by step, his neat handwriting became art. He wasn't solving, he was teaching. He broke down concepts with elegance that made Tyler shut up and Madison Chen forget her highlighter. Even Mrs. Harrison's grin evaporated. 10 minutes in, Jamal dropped the final answer, 16 piece of 3, and stepped back like a performer bowing at curtain call. Silence crashed in. Mrs. Harrison's face froze. No way. No kid should solve this. Unless... Her shock curdled into suspicion. That's quite remarkable, Jamal, she said, her tone dripping disbelief. Madison raised her hand. But we haven't even learned those techniques. Exactly, Mrs. Harrison snapped. So tell me, Jamal, where did you learn graduate-level math on your own? The accusation floated heavy in the air. Jamal simply said, I studied ahead. And in that instant, brilliance didn't make him safe. It made him dangerous. The room shifted like an audience, sensing the curtain about to drop. Tyler Bradford smirked, leaning back with the confidence only a trust fund haircut could buy. Maybe he had help, he whispered, loud enough to sting. Jamal's jaw flexed. I didn't have help. I studied MIT open courseware, Professor Strang's lectures, problem sets. I've got all my work saved. Mrs. Harrison pounced. MIT open courseware? Her tone was dipped in condescension. And you just happened to stumble on the exact problem I gave today? Gasps, side eyes, whispers. Doubt rolled across the room like wildfire. Sarah Williams dared to ask, Are you saying he cheated? I'm saying, Mrs. Harrison replied, her voice sharpening, that brilliance doesn't appear without proper instruction. What we saw today demands an explanation. Jamal's hands clenched. I can show you my notes. Months of work. What you have, she cut in, is a solution no student here should have managed without prior knowledge. The words landed like blows. The pride of a perfect solution twisted into suspicion. Even Madison Chen, usually unflappable, tried to reason. But Mrs. Harrison, even if he'd seen it before, he'd still need to understand it. Understanding and memorization are different, Mrs. Harrison snapped. That S when Jamal's voice cut low and dangerous. You want me to solve another one? The offer rattled her. What if he crushed it again? Her mask flickered, then hardened. That won't be necessary. What is necessary is academic integrity. She reached for the yellow referral slip, Westfield's scarlet letter. Every stroke of her pen was a nail sealing Jamal's academic coffin. I'm sending you to Principal Martinez. Academic dishonesty is a serious matter." The class gasped. Madison looked horrified. Even Tyler blinked at the escalation. Jamal stood frozen, the paper trembling in his hand. "I can prove my work." "What you can do," Mrs. Harrison cut in, handing him the slip like a verdict, "is explain to Principal Martinez how you became a math prodigy overnight." And then, with the venom of irony only a biased teacher could muster, "Class, let this be a lesson. Shortcuts and deception will always be exposed." The only deception, of course, was standing at the front of the room. Jamal's footsteps echoed down Westfield's polished halls, each one sounding less like a walk to the office and more like the march of someone headed to trial. He clutched the yellow slip like it was radioactive. What he didn't know was that someone else had been watching and was about to flip the script. Principal Sophia Martinez's office smelled like coffee and disappointment. Diplomas lined the wall like trophies from a war against teenagers. A leather chair waited for Jamal. The referral slip stretched between them like evidence in a murder trial. "So," Principal Martinez said, glasses perched low, "Mrs. Harrison believes you may have compromised academic integrity." 12 hours ago, Jamal had been daydreaming about state math competitions. Now he was on trial for being too good at math. His mother's sacrifices, his scholarship, his future, all dangling by a thread. "I didn't cheat," Jamal said, voice steady but low. "I solved it because I knew how." "That's the problem, Jamal." Martinez leaned forward, sympathetic yet suspicious. She opened his Lincoln public file. B's, some A's, no math competitions, nothing that screamed prodigy. "Your record doesn't reflect the level of work we saw today. Can you see why Mrs. Harrison is concerned?" Jamal's fists tightened on his knees. "I taught myself. Every night after work, I studied MIT's free courses. I have notes, problems, proof." "Yes, Mrs. Harrison mentioned that." Martinez's tone softened, but the words sharpened. "But the probability you just happened to practice the exact same type of problem she assigned? Statistically, unlikely." The trap was airtight. Excellence had become Exhibit A in his prosecution. In Westfield logic, genius without pedigree, Jack's fraud. Then, 3 knocks on the door. The secretary entered, her face tight. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Elena Rodriguez from MIT's mathematics department is here. She says it's urgent, about a student." Martinez blinked. "MIT? We don't have any scheduled—" The door opened wider. In walked Dr. Rodriguez, silver hair, academic authority radiating like sunlight through storm clouds. And trailing behind her, Mrs. Harrison, pale with alarm like a magician whose trick had just been spoiled mid-performance. "Principal Martinez," Dr. Rodriguez said, extending her hand with crisp authority, "we need to talk about Jamal Williams." The room's air shifted. The trial had a new judge. Dr. Rodriguez didn't wait for ceremony. "I apologize for arriving unannounced, but there's been a serious misunderstanding regarding one of your students." Mrs. Harrison nearly tripped over herself to get ahead of the damage. "Principal Martinez, if I may explain, Dr. Rodriguez was here today as part of the university partnership program. She was in the back of my classroom during the incident." Jamal's pulse jumped. Someone had seen it. Not just anyone, an MIT mathematician with the authority to turn whispers into testimony. "What exactly did you observe?" Martinez asked, careful, like a judge calling her star witness. Dr. Rodriguez's gaze settled on Jamal, and for the first time since Westfield, an adult's eyes didn't hold suspicion. They held recognition. "I observed a young man demonstrate mathematical understanding I rarely see in my graduate students," she said, voice crisp. "Elegant problem-solving, true conceptual mastery, the kind of self-directed learning we beg students to attempt." Mrs. Harrison flushed crimson. "With respect, the problem was deliberately chosen to be beyond high school level." "Exactly," Rodriguez countered smoothly. "Which is why what I witnessed was extraordinary. The problem came from Apostle's mathematical analysis, a text I teach in advanced undergraduate courses. To solve it requires not just knowledge, but insight. Harrison's jaw tightened. But how could he possibly gain that insight without expensive tutoring? Without privilege? Rodriguez didn't flinch. Some of the greatest mathematicians in history were autodidacts. Curiosity doesn't check your bank account before it lets you learn. The room thickened. Martinez's eyes darted between them like a referee at a heavyweight bout. Dr. Rodriguez, are you saying Jamal's performance was legitimate? I'm not saying it, Rodriguez replied, steel under silk. I'm proving it. What I witnessed was authentic understanding, not cheating. For one breath, hope surged in Jamal's chest. Finally, someone saw him. But Mrs. Harrison lunged back in, her voice sharpened by desperation. Even with Dr. Rodriguez's respectability, the timing remains suspicious. The Polish, the coincidence, it reeks of preparation, of dishonesty. The words oozed across the office like a toxic fog. Doubt was a disease, and Westfield's immune system loved it. Principal Martinez sighed, shoulders heavy under bureaucracy. Dr. Rodriguez, I value your expertise, but Mrs. Harrison raises concerns we can't ignore. Policy is policy. Jamal, I'll need to suspend you pending investigation. 24 hours. The gavel fell. Suspension, which meant missing the state qualifier, which meant questions from his mother with no good answers, which meant his shot at the future was collapsing before it even began. Jamal sat frozen, heartbeat loud in his ears. He had just been convicted of brilliance. It meant shame stamped onto his name, whether he was guilty or not. Jamal tightened his grip on his backpack like it was both shield and evidence bag, stepping toward the door when, Principal Martinez, Dr. Rodriguez's voice sliced the tension. I believe this young man deserves the chance to prove his abilities under controlled conditions. Would you be amenable to an independent assessment? The room froze. The suspension pen hovered mid-air. Mrs. Harrison's face twitched, the look of a prosecutor watching the jury slip out of her grasp. An independent assessment? Martinez repeated, wary but intrigued. Precisely. Rodriguez stepped closer, radiating the calm menace of a mathematician who's graded too many bad proofs to fear politics. If there are doubts, let's settle them with evidence. I propose a formal evaluation. 3 problems, increasing difficulty, observed by impartial witnesses. No prior knowledge. Pure, raw ability. Mrs. Harrison's voice cracked a little as panic bled through. With respect, Dr. Rodriguez, this is highly irregular. We have procedures. Your procedures, Rodriguez cut in, voice smooth as chalk on a blackboard, are about to crush a gifted mind under suspicion instead of truth. As an educator, I cannot stand by while bureaucracy buries brilliance. It landed like a mic drop. Martinez hesitated. Westfield's pride hung in the balance. Harrison, the trusted veteran with tenure, and PTA loyalty, versus Rodriguez, the university partner whose name alone meant prestige, grants, headlines. Politics was pulling her in both directions. What exactly would this involve? Martinez asked carefully. Rodriguez already had her phone out like a general drawing battle lines. 1 problem in calculus, 1 in linear algebra, 1 in differential equations. Each requires genuine comprehension. I will design and oversee the exam personally. If he fails, your suspicions stand. If he succeeds, he deserves not only an apology, but recognition. Mrs. Harrison nearly sputtered. And if he chokes? If the pressure doesn't erase understanding, Rodriguez snapped back. It reveals it. The office turned courtroom silent. Even the secretary outside leaned in. Finally, Martinez nodded, the decision etched across her face. Very well. We'll reconvene at 3 in the mathematics conference room. Dr. Rodriguez, you'll prepare the problems. School officials will witness. Jamal, do you accept these terms? Understanding the outcome will determine your academic future." His throat was dry, but his voice held steady. "Yes, ma'am." As plans unfolded, Jamal felt his mother's sacrifices. Double shifts, whispered prayers, press against his ribs. Every number he'd ever scratched in the margins of notebooks had brought him here. Rodriguez leaned down, her voice for him alone. "What I saw wasn't luck. It was thinking at the highest level. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." "But what if I freeze up?" Jamal whispered. "What if the pressure?" "Then you fight through it," she said, steel beneath warmth. "Real mathematicians don't get everything right on the first attempt. They persist. They outthink the panic." Mrs. Harrison cut in sharply from across the room. "Dr. Rodriguez, I hope you're not coaching the student before his exam." Rodriguez didn't even turn. "I'm reminding him that true ability isn't erased by manufactured doubt." The air was charged. In less than an hour, Jamal wouldn't just be solving math, he'd be solving for his future. The tension between Dr. Rodriguez and Mrs. Harrison now had the static charge of two storm clouds colliding. This wasn't about a math test anymore. It was a war over who got to define genius, who got to claim authority, and whether brilliance needed a pedigree or could ride the bus. "Very well," Principal Martinez declared, voice clipped like a gavel. 3 p.m., Mathematics Conference Room. Dr. Rodriguez will prepare the problems. Mrs. Harrison will observe for the school. I will serve as neutral witness. Then her gaze landed on Jamal. "Young man, use the next 45 minutes wisely. This assessment will decide whether you stay at Westfield Academy or go back to your previous school." The words landed like a verdict. As they left the office, Dr. Rodriguez caught Jamal's arm, her voice dropping. "There's something you should know. I didn't come here by accident. I've been tracking MIT's open course forums. Your posts, your solutions, your late-night questions, they stood out. I came here looking for the mind behind them. I didn't expect a witch trial." Jamal froze. You knew?" "I knew brilliance was coming from somewhere in this district. I had no idea it was you." The revelation hit him like oxygen. This wasn't just about defense. It was about validation. By 3, the conference room had transformed into a courtroom arena. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like interrogators. 3 manila envelopes sat on the polished table, aligned like evidence exhibits. Rodriguez had filled them with what she called the definitive test. 3 problems across calculus, linear algebra, and differential equations. Problems no cheat sheet could bluff through. Problems that demanded thought. Martinez entered first, clutching a legal pad like case notes. Mrs. Harrison followed, tension leaking from every gesture. Behind her, Assistant Principal Johnson arrived, summoned as an extra witness. This was no longer one teacher's suspicion. It was an event. Jamal sat at the table already, hands folded, expression calm. Inside, his chest was a storm, but waiting 45 minutes had forged his nerves into something sharp. This wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about proving brilliance belonged to anyone who bled for it. Rodriguez laid out the rules like a judge reading charges. 1 hour, 3 problems, no notes, no resources, pencil and paper only. He must show all work and explain his reasoning. If he succeeds, the matter is settled. Mrs. Harrison shifted, the chair creaking with her discomfort. "And if he stumbles?" "Then you'll have your vindication," Rodriguez said flatly. The first envelope slid open. A multivariable calculus optimization with constraints. Not just hard, designed to humiliate. Jamal read it once, twice. His mind clicked like a lock opening. He began writing. "We need to minimize this function with 2 variables, subject to the constraint," he said aloud, voice steady. "Using Lagrange multipliers, we set up the system of equations to find our critical points." His pencil flew, but not in panic. In rhythm, like a musician. Each line neat, each explanation crisp. 15 minutes later, the solution sat on the page like a crown jewel. Harrison's face twitched. This wasn't guessing. This wasn't copying. This was mastery. The second envelope opened. A 3-3 matrix waited inside, daring him to crack eigenvalue decomposition, a problem that made undergrads sweat bullets. Jamal leaned forward, his pencil poised. "To find the eigenvalues," he murmured, "we solve the characteristic equation by setting the determinant of A minus lambda I equal to 0. It was like watching an artist's sketch. The numbers flowed, each step justified, each explanation precise. Rodriguez's eyes shone. Martinez's pen scribbled furiously. Johnson looked impressed despite himself. And Mrs. Harrison? She gripped her seat like it was the last lifeboat on the Titanic. No false starts, no erasures, just clean, deliberate mathematics flowing from Jamal's pencil like a second language, earned through countless midnight hours hunched over textbooks. Dr. Rodriguez's sharp eyes met Principal Martinez's across the table. She gave a slight nod. She'd already seen enough brilliance to confirm what she suspected, but the third envelope would settle the matter beyond doubt. Inside waited what Rodriguez privately called the killer question, a differential equation with boundary conditions, a task that demanded not just technical competence, but intuition. Jamal opened it, scanned the page, and, for the first time, hesitated. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Mrs. Harrison leaned forward, her heart quickening. Finally, she thought. This was where the facade would collapse, where the fraud would be revealed. But Jamal's pause wasn't confusion. It was recognition. He knew this territory. Not identical, but close. Close enough to see the path. He straightened in his chair, voice steady. "This is a second-order linear differential equation with non-constant coefficients," he began. "We all need the method of Frobenius to find a series solution around the regular singular point." Mrs. Harrison went pale. She knew the terminology. This wasn't AP calculus. This was graduate-level vocabulary rolling fluently from the mouth of a teenager. Jamal's pencil moved quickly now. He explained as he worked, each line of mathematics punctuated by clarity, as though he were teaching rather than merely solving. "The boundary conditions form a system that constrains our coefficients," he said, writing without hesitation. "Solving this system yields the unique solution that satisfies both the differential equation and the specified conditions." When he set the pencil down, exactly 53 minutes had passed. 3 problems, 3 flawless solutions. Not just correct, beautiful. Dr. Rodriguez reviewed every symbol, every explanation. 3 minutes of silence passed like 3 hours. Then slowly, she lifted her head. "These aren't just correct," she said, her voice carrying both awe and finality. "They're exemplary. His explanations reveal conceptual mastery I rarely see in graduate students. What you've witnessed here is authentic mathematical maturity." She turned to Mrs. Harrison, her gaze cutting like a blade. "Do you have any questions about the validity of these solutions?" Mrs. Harrison's throat tightened. The papers on the table glared back at her like damning evidence. Her case had disintegrated into dust. She opened her mouth, but no words emerged. Principal Martinez stepped in. "Dr. Rodriguez, in your professional opinion, could these results have been achieved through memorization or dishonesty?" "Absolutely not," Rodriguez answered with steel. "These problems demand deep understanding. There is no way they could have been faked. What we witnessed today is real talent. Talent that deserves recognition, not suspicion." The room fell into a heavy silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. From beyond the door came the muffled shuffle of students switching classes. Inside, though, something profound had shifted. It wasn't just mathematics that had been tested. It was integrity. It was justice. And in that moment, Jamal had solved something larger than equations. He had solved the very equation of his worth. Dr. Rodriguez rose slowly, gathering Jamal's papers with the kind of care one gives to priceless artifacts. Her movements were deliberate, her posture unshakable. When she spoke, her voice carried the full weight of MIT behind it. each word echoing like a verdict. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, holding Jamal's work aloft, "what you have just witnessed is not ordinary ability. This level of mathematical maturity appears perhaps once every 3 or 4 years in my graduate program. This young man has solved problems that leave PhD candidates floundering." She lifted the first solution, her eyes narrowing with conviction. This Lagrange multiplier problem was executed with textbook precision, yes, but more importantly, with geometric intuition. That distinction is the difference between a memorized trick and true mathematical insight. Principal Martinez leaned forward, uncertain. "Dr. Rodriguez, could you put this into terms we might understand?" Rodriguez strode to the whiteboard, chalk snapping against its surface. "Imagine asking a high school literature student to not just read Shakespeare, but to dissect it at the level of a doctoral thesis, line by line, theme by theme, uncovering patterns others miss. That," she tapped the board, "is what Jamal just did with mathematics." The room stilled. Mrs. Harrison finally spoke, her voice trembling but defiant. "But surely with enough online study..." "Online study does not create this depth of understanding," Rodriguez cut in, her tone sharpened to steel. "I have reviewed thousands of solutions over 2 decades. I know the hollow ring of memorized procedures. What Jamal demonstrated was comprehension, deep, intuitive, elegant." She lifted the second solution. Eigenvalue decomposition. He didn't just calculate. He explained the why behind each step, showing awareness of the transformation itself. "That," she said firmly, "is the difference between a calculator and a mathematician." Assistant Principal Johnson, silent until now, spoke up. "Dr. Rodriguez, if you had to estimate the probability that a student could fake this..." Rodriguez didn't hesitate. 0. Mathematical maturity cannot be faked any more than true musical genius can be faked. Either you hear the symphony or you don't. Jamal hears it. She turned, fixing her gaze directly on Mrs. Harrison. Her words cut like a blade. "So the real question is this. How does a teacher with 23 years of experience fail to recognize brilliance when it was sitting in her classroom?" The air thickened with accusation. Mrs. Harrison's face flushed crimson. There was no defense she could give without exposing the prejudice behind her judgment. "And let us be clear," Rodriguez pressed on, her voice rising. "Had this assessment not taken place, Westfield Academy would have destroyed the future of one of the most promising mathematicians I have ever encountered." Principal Martinez shifted uncomfortably, sensing the ground shift from individual blame towards systemic failure. "Dr. Rodriguez," she said cautiously, "what would you recommend moving forward?" "First," Rodriguez replied crisply, "immediate reinstatement with a formal apology. Second, placement into coursework worthy of his ability, university-level mathematics. And third, an urgent re-examination of how many other exceptional students are being overlooked because of entrenched assumptions." The word assumptions hung heavy in the air. Everyone understood what she meant. Mrs. Harrison tried again, her voice barely audible. "I was only following protocol for academic integrity." "No," Rodriguez snapped, cutting her off like a gavel. "You were following prejudices. Protocol defends standards. Prejudice smothers excellence." Her heels clicked against the floor as she walked to Jamal, who sat motionless, overwhelmed by a validation he had never expected to hear. She placed a hand on his shoulder. This young man taught himself what most graduate students fear to attempt. He labored alone, without tutors, without guidance, powered only by pure curiosity and relentless dedication. Instead of honoring that, this institution nearly punished him for it. Her voice rose, resonant, undeniable. Today was not just an assessment of mathematics. Today was an assessment of justice. And justice has spoken. The words dropped like a thunderclap. "MIT would be honored to have Jamal in our program when he's ready." For a moment, no one breathed. The sentence hung in the air, reshaping the entire room. Jamal wasn't just vindicated. He was being invited to the academic Olympus itself, and not with a polite pat on the back, but with a full scholarship. A door that had seemed sealed by concrete prejudice just hours earlier now stood wide open. Principal Martinez blinked, staring at the stack of flawless solutions spread across the table. Then at Jamal, calm but glowing. Then at Dr. Rodriguez, who radiated unflinching conviction. Finally, her gaze fell on Mrs. Harrison. "I believe you owe this young man an apology." It was like asking a stone pillar to bow. For the first time in her 23-year career, Mrs. Harrison's voice faltered. When she finally whispered, "I was wrong about your abilities, Jamal," the words seemed to drain her like an admission of guilt at a sentencing. Jamal, however, wasn't watching her. He was watching Dr. Rodriguez, because she wasn't finished. "Principal Martinez," Rodriguez said, her voice booming with the authority of someone used to rewriting futures, "I am prepared to recommend Jamal for MIT's Early Admission Partnership Program. Immediate placement in advanced coursework, mentorship support, full scholarship, everything he needs to thrive." Even Assistant Principal Johnson's jaw dropped. But then Dr. Rodriguez pivoted, sharp as a scalpel. "Before we discuss Jamal's future, we must address Westfield's present. How many other students are buried under doubt simply because they don't look, sound, or test like the narrow image of gifted we cling to?" Her proposal landed like a revolution in a single sentence. Anonymous mathematics assessments. No names, no teacher recommendations, no transcripts, just raw ability. Jamal's file had shown B's and C's. On paper, he was average. Online, under the anonymity of student ID 4721, he was a hidden genius. How many more 4721s were out there? Within weeks, Westfield launched the protocol. The results rattled the system. Maria Santos, a shy sophomore often mistaken as struggling, solved calculus proofs with elegance professors would envy. David Kim, usually dismissed because English wasn't his strongest suit, revealed analytical instincts that cut sharper than any translation barrier. 3 kids from the regular math track leapfrogged into college-level work. Patterns emerged too. Ugly, undeniable patterns. Students with certain last names, certain zip codes, certain reputations had been underestimated for years. For Mrs. Harrison, it was a mirror she'd never wanted to look into. Bias training wasn't optional. It was mandatory, painful, humbling, necessary. Slowly, she began to see her students not as files, but as hidden constellations of brilliance waiting to be mapped. Jamal's story didn't stay in Westfield. It spread like wildfire. Case studies, conferences. Rodriguez challenging universities with a single, piercing question. Are you measuring excellence or just pedigree? And 6 months later, Jamal stood at MIT's freshman orientation, his mother crying tears that carried generations of struggle. He wore the look of someone who had walked through fire and come out sharper than steel. But the true victory wasn't his acceptance letter. It wasn't even the full ride. It was this. Knowing that the door he had forced open wouldn't slam shut behind him, that students who came after would never again be judged by suspicion first and talent second. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been institutionalized. The very system that once tried to crush Jamal Williams had been forced to evolve, dragged, kicking and screaming into the future. And that evolution would not just rescue Jamal. It would rescue hundreds of young minds whose brilliance had been hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with courage to notice. 3 years later, Jamal stood before a packed auditorium at the National Education Summit, wearing the quiet armor of confidence he'd forged that terrifying day in Mrs. Harrison's classroom. His MIT senior thesis, ironically on algorithmic bias and academic assessment, was tucked under his arm like a weapon sharper than any sword. This time, the entire nation's educators leaned forward, hanging on the voice of a once-dismissed black teenager. But here's the twist. This story was never just about Jamal's triumph. It was about the uncomfortable question he now hurled at everyone with the precision of a mathematical proof. How many brilliant minds are we failing to see? Think about it. Right now, across classrooms, offices, boardrooms, there are students and workers whose potential is invisible simply because it doesn't look like excellence to those holding the keys. Wrong zip code, wrong accent, wrong last name, wrong fit. Mrs. Harrison knew that truth intimately. Once the villain of Jamal's near downfall, she now became his unlikely ally. She admitted, publicly, that her greatest failure wasn't almost destroying Jamal's future. It was the decades of students she never even gave a chance to surprise her, the silent dreams she had unconsciously smothered beneath the velvet weight of professional judgment. Dr. Rodriguez's anonymous assessment program had, by then, already identified more than 200 underestimated students. That's 200 futures that might have been written off as average. 200 Jamals waiting in the shadows. But the number raised a darker question. How many others weren't lucky? Because Jamal's story hinged on chance. He was lucky that Dr. Rodriguez had been there. Lucky she recognized his online brilliance. Lucky she had the authority to fight. But luck is not a system. And for every Jamal who slips through to the light, how many are still buried in the rubble of bias? This isn't just about schools. It's about every workplace that rewards safe mediocrity over dangerous brilliance. Every committee that chooses the familiar name over the outsider's spark. Every time we crown comfort instead of courage. Mathematics saved Jamal because math doesn't lie. Equations don't care what neighborhood you're from. But most human genius isn't numbers. It's art, ideas, innovation. And in those gray spaces, bias can wear the mask of standards, and prejudice can masquerade as professionalism. So Jamal threw down the gauntlet to the nation. Look harder, look deeper. Who are you not seeing? Who have you already written off without realizing it? Who is carrying brilliance in quiet hands while you shuffle them to the margins? Dr. Rodriguez hadn't saved Jamal out of pity. She had saved him with justice, with evidence, with the courage to name prejudice when others wrapped it in policy. That's the power each of us holds, to demand truth over assumption, to replace comfort with clarity. Because right now, somewhere in a classroom, another Jamal is waiting. Waiting for someone, teacher, parent, boss, you, to actually see them. The question isn't whether they exist. The question is whether you'll be the one who recognizes them. So, recognize them. And if you want more stories where brilliance breaks through the walls built to contain it, you know where to click. Subscribe to Fate Tales, because every genius deserves their moment to shine.